So we have one of these extraordinary panels now coming up. And I guess our panelists can come on the stage, if they would, please. While they're sitting down, I'm going to introduce the chair, and it's a real pleasure to do that. His name is David Ticoll, and recently, over the last while, he's been very focused on the question of ICT skills. And he's a special advisor, and he was also the past founding executive director of the Canadian Coalition for Tomorrow's IT Skills. So there he's leading in the development of innovative strategies for growing the talent pool. And this is a huge gap and a huge problem. As you all know, unemployment is high, youth unemployment is even higher, but on the other hand, there are all kinds of skills and capabilities that are urgently needed in our economies all around the world. So how to address this problem is one of the big issues of the panel. I'll just say a couple of personal things about David. Who's right here. I've worked with David now for over 20 years, and he's a good friend and colleague. And David and I have actually written a couple of books together that were extraordinarily good books, I think, and they were both a bit bad timed. One book was called Digital Capital. It got the best review of a book I've ever read in Business Week. They called it Pure Enlightenment, but the book came out the month NASDAQ crashed.
Well, we did sell 100,000 copies.
Yeah, it still was a bestseller, but if it come out a year earlier, it could have been pretty great. We also co-authored a book called The Naked Corporation, and that was a decade ago, and now, of course, transparency has become a big theme. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Ticoll.
Thank you, Don. It's a pleasure to work with you on this forum. Okay, well, I'm really excited to be talking about this issue with just a wonderful and really distinguished group of panelists and with everybody in this room. So I'm going to start off with a few comments. Canada's economic success, as you know, if you're not from Canada, you've probably heard of Canada as a country of natural resources: oil, gas, potash, wheat, hydropower, minerals, and other resources that mainly support the physical parts of our various economies. The ICT sector does rely on some of these resources, hydropower, minerals, and so on, but the definitive resource for the information economy is brain power, knowledge, skills, creativity, leadership, collaboration, entrepreneurial drive, and wisdom. These kinds of natural resources are everywhere in short supply. I'm sure you feel this in your world wherever you come from. Or where they exist, they barely keep up with the exploding kaleidoscope of innovation and change. As a result, companies and organizations in all sectors of the economy face enormous challenges in achieving the full potential of information and communications technologies for innovation, productivity, and prosperity. Our panel aims to describe some of the fundamental issues and challenges and the strategies that we can apply to address these ever-vexing problems. So I'm going to make just a couple of introductory comments, and then the way it's going to work is I'll ask each of our panelists a key question or two, and then we'll go into an open-ended roundtable amongst all of us. So first, a couple of introductory points. First of all, the dynamics of the ICT labor market vary a lot from country to country and even within countries. But to make a gross generalization, there's a big difference here between so-called rich countries and emerging economies. You know, there are shortages everywhere, but in the so-called rich economies like Canada, the US, the UK, and so on, it's a real challenge to encourage young people in general, and especially young women in particular, to choose tech careers. In Canada, for example, 25% of ICT professionals are female. That's probably the #1 diversity problem in this field, and that's true in most Western countries. Meanwhile, in emerging economies like India, Brazil, Mexico, China, and so on, young people of both genders clamor to get into good technology programs. In those so-called rich economies, enrollments in post-secondary IT-related programs may be increasing a bit, but they've yet to recover from the collapse they experienced after the dot-com crash 10 years ago. Meanwhile, there's big changes happening on the demand side. IT is now in everything. Hybrid careers exist from IT and business, which is probably the single largest area, hybrid business technology careers, plus every other field: media, life science, sports, smart power, you name it. Today's careers mash up IT with anything you imagine. Combined with entrepreneurship and growing demand for 20th different kinds of 20th century leadership, collaboration, online collaboration skills, and so on. It sounds like these careers are far from geeky, but that's still the perception out there amongst a lot of young people, parents, teachers, guidance counselors, and so on. And who knows about these transformations? A lot of people can't even answer what an IT career is about. And then compounding the problem is the quality of labor market information, the data about supply and demand. And it's just not keeping up. In many countries, the granularity and frequency of the available data just don't adequately reflect the realities of today's exploding job definitions and rapidly changing needs. And let's face it, the labor market is a market, and you can't have a responsive, liquid market of any kind without accurate and timely information. But there is good news. In Canada and other countries, we're starting to address some of these problems. I'll leave it to our first speaker, Dr. Leach, as well as our other panel members to expand on this vital point. So let's go right to the panel. I'll introduce all of our panelists, and then I'll sit down and we'll jump right into the conversation. So Dr. Kelly Leach I'll tell you where each person's from. I guess she's based in Ottawa, but she's also a member of Parliament for Simcoe Grey, which for those of you who know a little bit about Canadian geography, it's really the southern end of Georgian Bay, covers places like Wasaga, Collingwood, Blue Mountain, and so on. Have I got that right? Yeah, good. And she's also, and especially important for this panel, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Human Resources and Skills Development and to the Minister of Labour. And HRSDC is really the ministry that is kind of chaperoning labour market development in Canada. So it's really the key ministry for our conversation. Brian Gonzalez comes to us from Silicon Valley, and he's responsible for Intel's global education sales programs. His team drives programs to accelerate technology benefits in education, and he's also a frequent international speaker on issues that are relevant for us today. Transformational education programs, project management applied to large-scale tech adoption, and collaboration as a core competency of high-performance teams. Then we have Karen Price, who comes all the way from the UK, and we're really thrilled that she's made the trip. She's the CEO of eSkills UK, which is the employer-led sector skills council for business and information technology for all of the UK. So this is the organization that's really mandated to fix the skills problem in ICT for all of the UK. And oh, by the way, Karen has been awarded an Order of the British Empire for her leadership in ensuring that IT contributes to national competitiveness. And to round off the panel, we have one of the world's greatest thought leaders on some of these questions, John Seeley Brown, who also comes from Silicon Valley. He's a visiting scholar and advisor to the provost at the University of Southern California and the independent co-chairman of Deloitte's Center for the Edge. Before that, or sometime before that, I guess, John was the chief scientist at Xerox Corporation and the director of its Palo Alto Research Center, a position that he held for about almost 20 years. John has authored several acclaimed books, including The Social Life of Information, The Power of Pull, quite relevant to our discussion today, and also The New Culture of Learning, his latest. So that's our panel, and I'm very excited to jump into it, so I'm going to move over to my seat and get things rolling. Okay, so Dr. Leach, let's start with you. Our question to you is, I guess, a two-part question. What's the nature of the ICT skills gap in Canada, and what are you guys doing about it in the Government of Canada to close this gap? What are you doing? What are you planning to do?
Well, thank you very much for the question, and I want to wish everyone a good morning and greetings from the Government of Canada and from our Prime Minister Harper, and also extend a warm welcome to all of you for coming to Canada, those of you that are traveling from abroad. I'm really delighted to be here this morning, and my previous life, I'm a pediatric orthopedic surgeon. My research is in robotics, so I have a bit of a sense of the value firsthand in my professional career of what ICT professions can do to augment research and innovation. I'll also profess that I don't speak in front of a lot of large audiences. Most of the time I spent my time in front of two people, an anesthetist and a patient, both of which were asleep. So if I speak a little too quickly here or you don't hear something properly, please, I beg your forgiveness to begin with. It's also somewhat humbling also to be sitting on a panel with such thought leaders from across the world. I'm but a young Canadian, and as I say, my previous life is as a pediatric surgeon. Now today I want to talk a little bit about the full spectrum of digital skills development for the ICT sector and the ICT needs for all Canadians. Like so many other advanced economies, Canada too needs to boost its productivity, and here in Canada we want to continue to be competitive on the global stage. Now Canada has a bit of a paradoxical challenge at the moment. We have some areas that have high unemployment, other areas where we're experiencing labor shortages. In fact, we have some regions that experience both. And in addition to that, we have a situation where we have an aging population with a number of individuals, particularly those with high skills, exiting our labor force. So creating, adopting, utilizing new technologies are critical to increasing our productivity here in Canada. But to use this new technology effectively and efficiently, we need to have enough people with the right skills. And this includes not just highly skilled individuals, but also making sure that all Canadians have some degree of digital literacy. You know, it's been estimated that over the next 4 years in Canada alone, there'll be a need for another 72,000 individuals with ITC skills. Like, that's an enormous number. And I've been doing roundtable discussions across the country. We have needs in every province and in a wide range of business sectors. You know, there's this tendency always to just focus that, you know, the ICT folks are the guys that just run the computers. But I can tell you firsthand from standing in my operating room and trying to make sure that the equipment and the technology I need to use, whether that be the MRI imaging or the CT imaging, is required, and I need an ICT expert, someone who understands that machinery extremely well in order to be able to do my job. So whether that be healthcare, banking, insurance, or education, ICT and the focus on a digital economy is essential. And it's because every aspect of our Canadian economy is clamoring for individuals with this skill set that we actually have to be very, very focused on it. For Canada to stay competitive, digital skills development is critical not only just in the ITC sector itself, but across a wide range of sectors. And in many respects, Canada is an excellent place for the technology industries to grow roots. Among OECD countries, we have the highest proportion, in fact 51% of working age people with a post-secondary degree. It's a huge number and an excellent opportunity for a new firm. And our young people score well in math and sciences. The quality of our workforce is really second to none. And with technology and trade transforming the workplace, we need to improve our skills so that we can be even better. Now, we also have a bit of a digital divide here in Canada. I can tell you that from first-hand experience. My father has challenges using his smartphone to download the photos of his new granddaughters. But we also have a number of individuals with high skills, and what we need to do is bridge that gap, bring people closer together, make sure that we don't have that digital divide and that we don't have the challenges with digital literacy. And so what has the Government of Canada been focused on? The second part of the equation here, and the question that I was asked. We're making significant investments in skills and training to help Canadians prepare for jobs today, but also for the future. I think many of the jobs of the future, we may not necessarily know their specifics, but we know that there'll be a digital component to them. So in our budget in 2011, the Department of Human Resources and Skills Development committed to allocating $60 million over 3 years for a digital skills strategy to promote key disciplines. But we've also focused on youth. As was mentioned earlier, there's a huge challenge about making sure that young people are integrated into the economy. Our government has a $300 million commitment. It's called the YES campaign, the Youth Employment Strategy, where there are multiple components of it that are focused on the digital economy. So whether that be $50 million to better connect young Canadians with ICT jobs, or an increased awareness campaign, our Digital Jobs of Tomorrow campaign, we're doing what we can to link young Canadians to great opportunities in the ITC sector, to make sure that 72,000 jobs are filled by young Canadians with the right skill set. In addition, we have a very large young Aboriginal community in Canada, and we are focused on making sure that those young Canadians have the essential skills that they need to be prosperous in the Canadian economy. And through the Skills and Partnership Fund, we focus specifically on those young Aboriginal Canadians to give them the skill set to enter into the economy. And finally, we're trying to encourage as many individuals as possible to come to Canada to help us grow our economy, and we're focused on foreign credentialing recognition, making sure that those individuals who want to immigrate here to Canada and help our country grow and our economy be prosperous have that opportunity, and that we do it expediently. So our government remains focused on job creation, economic growth. We want to make sure that Canadians have the right skills and training so that they can meet the needs of today and tomorrow. And for us to do that, we need to work with private sector partnerships. We need our private sector coordinators to come forward and work with us on the education of young Canadians. And we also have to make sure that they have the data they need, the labour market information that's up to date, so that Canadian students and workers know where the demand is. Whether that's working with the private sector or educational institutions, the Government of Canada is focused on making sure that young Canadians, Aboriginal Canadians, have an opportunity to be integrated into the economy. So I encourage as many of the private sector leaders here in the audience as possible to aid us in that on-the-job training and retraining in digital skills specifically, so that we can make sure that we have the employees, the young Canadians, that can make sure that you can grow your firms. So as our economy strengthens here in Canada, the labour market continues to evolve here, we need to work in partnership.
Thank you, Dr. Leach. That was a very, very articulate and well laid out description of the issues and challenges that we face in Canada, and some very good initiatives being taken by the government. So let's just continue this initial set of questions, and we'll go next to Brian. And Brian, I just wanted to ask you, Intel. Okay, what's great about Brian? He is actually a real employer, or he represents a real employer. So, do you face challenges in finding people with the right kinds of technical skills that you need as an organization?
Well, yes, we do, and I'm delighted to be in this panel because I hope to get answers to a lot that ails me personally as a team leader across many geographies that's always looking out for the best talent. At Intel, we have to grow our markets, and to do that, we have to grow our talent base, not only within our company, but with the 145,000 partners that we work with in 127 countries. At Intel, we have 100,000 employees, and in any given year, we're hiring between 7,000 and 11,000 new recruits. At the same time, we have 4,000 interns. And while we do all of this, because we are working on technology that we have to invent, so sometimes it's not as easy just to go hire someone for something specifically, but more for the creative thought or for the leadership that they can bring across collaboration across many teams and many geographies. We have a constant effort to upskill our workforce. So not only do we have a need for graduate level engineers, but we also have the needs of the 145,000 partners that I talked about that have a variety of needs, mostly in the technology area. But those are the things that we need to help develop so we can grow our base by helping develop competencies within the countries that we operate. And we take advantage of that. We have offices in over 60 countries. We have operations in 127. So we can't be everywhere. So we rely heavily on our partners to help reach our customers and to give us an understanding of what that market needs and how we can best service that market. So yes, I have some needs, and I'm going to be excited to hear what the panel has to say in terms of the shortage of skills that we have, not only on the technology high-end base, but also in the areas of skills around collaboration and how we can make, small companies grow and large companies be more efficient.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Okay, Karen, so you represent the UK. What are I guess when we talked about this prior to getting together as a panel, what really struck me is not just the way, how articulate you were about the key challenges and skills, but also what they mean for the UK economy. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Thanks very much, David. And I'd just like to echo what Brian said. I've come along here to learn as well, and I think it's a great opportunity to share best practice and learn from each other, because I think we are challenged in terms of the skills pipeline into the sector. In the UK, economic recovery is still proving very elusive, David, to answer your question. However, employment has held up reasonably well, and IT employment in particular is holding up well. It's running at 3% of IT professionals are unemployed. So the demand for people is outstripping supply, and the demand for new people into IT is forecast to grow at twice the average in the UK. However, graduate posts are left unfilled in IT, and I think that's a shocking thing to be saying when youth unemployment is standing at 1 million in the UK. And to quote Stephen Leonard, who's the UK country manager for IBM in the UK, he's saying, we don't have a jobs problem, we've got a skills problem. We just aren't attracting the right quantity nor quality of young people into IT roles. So my job in eSkills UK is to bring together employers, and the deal from government in the UK is if employers will collaborate, if they'll take collective responsibility for skills, then in return, government will give them some influence over government skills policy and some authority over education. And what I want to do is share with you one particular problem we're wrestling with at the moment, because I am here, as I said, looking for answers. The number of young people applying to study IT or computing at university has fallen in the UK by 28% over the last 10 years. Set that alongside a growth of 51% on average across all subjects. So we've got more young people going to university, but fewer choosing to study IT or computing. And evidence is suggesting that it's young people's experience at school and what they're taught at school that is setting their perceptions of what careers might be like. In the UK, we have a statutory national curriculum, and all our 15 and 16-year-olds are taught digital literacy. So our 15-year-olds are being taught Word, they're being taught presentation, they're being taught health and safety considerations. What they should be learning is they should be learning a bit of coding, they should be learning web, they should be learning apps. And I can illustrate the point about the impact it has on young people by quoting a CIO of one of our biggest government departments in the UK, 24/7, millions of customers. He found his 14-year-old son writing an essay for his ICT class. He was describing when he should use wrist rests and how he should adjust his chair. And he looked up and said, "Dad, I can't believe you do this for a living." So I think that's something that we've got to turn around. And I'm pleased that employers have lobbied the UK government, and our Secretary of State for Education has responded, and he's torn up that national curriculum. And we're currently operating in a new system of what's called a wiki curriculum while we decide what should our 15 and 16-year-olds learn at school, what should the curriculum be in order to transform the attitudes of a generation of young people so they can enter quality IT careers. And that's one of the questions I've come here to ask today. We're looking for academic rigor. We want it to be relevant to universities and employers, but also we must inspire that generation of young people. So David, I'm going to leave it there with that question.
Okay, thanks, Karen. I'm just going to pick up that one word you said at the end, attitudes and transforming attitudes, and we'll come back to that topic because that's part of the conversation about the solution to this. John, okay, so you know, we know people need technical skills, we know people need communication skills, but I think you have some other thoughts about the changing skills profile that we need in ICT professionals, maybe not just making those points a little more precise, but also in a way changing how we think about each of them. So why don't you expand on that?
Besides just attitude?
Besides just attitude. Well,
Okay,
yeah.
thanks. I couldn't agree with more with what you were also just saying. I think the catch is, if we thought we had a big problem, we got even a bigger problem. And the reason is that we're moving into a world where I think that the average half-life of a skill in the IT game has gone from maybe 15 years to 5 years. This means that we're going to have to reinvent ourselves almost every 5 years. You don't do that by going back to school. You do that by engaging in a much more rich form of peer learning, collaborative learning, learning on demand. And in fact, I think that the biggest challenge we have is how do we find folks, starting with ourselves, that are willing to not fear change, but actually embrace change, and think about the acquisition of new points of view, new tools, new ways to look at the world as an adventure. If you can actually instill a sense of adventure, then learning on demand collaboratively is almost second nature. I think that is the big game here, because it's not just skills we have to worry about, but it is dispositions. Dispositions in terms of how do we find folks, how do we cultivate, by the way, you don't teach a disposition, you cultivate a disposition. How do you cultivate dispositions as saying, I love questing, I look at kind of opportunities to learn. For example, that's why we're all here today. Wherever I go, what's the opportunity to find something new, a new way to do something, a new point of view? How do I then take connecting? If I can quest and then I can connect, think about connecting in terms of much more active peer-based learning, not just authority-based learning, which you're doing a lot at Intel. And I think that this whole sense of taking seriously becoming what I might call the entrepreneurial learner. That does not mean learning to be an entrepreneur. That means how anything I do is there a chance to learn something new, to pick up some new point of view, and so on and so forth. I think that's incredibly important. And let me kind of close with the last couple of comments. We have to recognize that millennials actually are learning quite differently than we are. They learn as much from context as we learn from content. What is social media all about? Structuring context. They look at the world and they learn from the world and from each other in quite different ways. In fact, I go into many corporations and see all kinds of mentorship programs. And the first thing I ask the CEO or the board, well, show me the reverse mentorship. How much are you actually learning from the edge, the millennials coming in? Because in fact, we have a lot to learn from them, as of course they have a lot to learn from us. Because I think the game we're all in this room is as much leadership as technology. And we want IT people or people coming out of schools of information that can actually help communicate clearly, not just what these technological changes are technologically wise, but how does it change the very way we want to frame what our mission is, what our value system is, and what our business models have to be. And I just want to kind of close with a comment in the keynote we heard as we were coming on. As we move in our world from relatively simple mechanistic systems to the Internet of Things, an Internet of Things is as much an ecosystem as a cause and effect chain. How do we start thinking about the husbandry of complex ecosystems where feedbacks are galore and feed in on each other in moderately unpredictable ways? So how do we get folks that understand the unintended consequences of what appear to be relatively simple change? And how can our IT folks, who are the masters of understanding some of this, perhaps communicate to us how to think about these issues as well?
Thanks, John. Okay, so first of all, before we jump into the discussion, does anybody disagree with what John just said on this panel? No. Okay. Can we use that as a starting point, as part of the starting point? So I think, Brian, you seemed anxious to say something.
One other thing I wanted to add, what John talked about, it's at Intel, when you come in, it's not so much what you know, although that's important, but how you can learn and the velocity of how you can learn new concepts. And one of the things that I like to talk to my team, it's not so much about being original, but about being creative. And another aspect, I think, to your point, John, is that a few years ago, we used to talk about self-directed teams. What we're looking, at least at Intel, are self-designed teams. Teams that will come around, identify the problem, work with the local markets, and then go out and define that. And something that was said yesterday is that, we can't create labs to replicate things that are happening in local markets. We need to go to those local markets. So when I heard the discussion in Malaysia and what I've seen they've done in Taiwan and what I've seen what Mexico's doing, that's very interesting for us because that brings peer networks that are looking at technology but have a local flavor. And those types of self-defined teams really start to make a difference for us.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is that in Intel, you are establishing some of those cultural practices that John is talking about, right? But, okay, so here's the question. Premise that millennials learn differently, that they're attracted to careers in which you can have a career of this type. I think it's pretty fair to say that many, certainly IT companies are now embracing this culture. I'm not sure how true that is in sort of large IT organizations in other sectors. I think they tend to be a little more traditional. But setting that aside for a second, here's my question. Given that it's true that you can really experience this culture probably more in the ICT field than any other, and it reflects the cultural values of millennials, why are we having more trouble attracting people into this field than, say, into law, medicine, finance, or what have you? Anybody have a thought on that?
Because we don't tell them what's available.
Right.
So I'm a newly elected member of Parliament, but was an academic at the University of Toronto and at Western University here in Canada for some time. When I go to the classrooms in my riding in the 8 high schools and I talk to them about what careers are available to them, whether that be in the digital economy or becoming an electrician, they have no clue what's available to them out there as jobs that can help grow the Canadian economy. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders, to the point that was made earlier, to make sure that these young Canadians, but also young people across the globe, know what those new jobs are. Here in Canada, we have a rich resource base, and so yes, we need people to enter the trades, whether that becoming a pipe fitter or an electrician. But we also need people to enter into the ICT field, as I mentioned before, this huge gap of 72,000 young Canadians that we need to fill these roles. What we also need, though, is we need people like yourselves in this audience and the people who are sitting here in our panel, myself included, to go out and tell young people about what's available to them, what a huge opportunity they have in front of them to grow the Canadian economy, but also to provide themselves a great quality of life in an environment that they want to learn in. And so I guess I leave that as a bit of a challenge for everyone here in the audience. Go find the high school or the junior high school more appropriately and go talk to those grade 8 students and tell them what you do, because they probably want to do it too, but they don't know how to get there.
So you're doing something about this, Karen, aren't you?
Well, yes, we are. And I wanted to, if I may, David, just go back when you were talking about the broader economy. And I do like, Kelly, your youth employment strategy. Yeah, yes, great name. And I just wanted to share with you some research that Telefonica has just done in the UK. And we've got 1 million unemployed young people in the UK, yes, which is running at about 27% of all young people, and I'm sure everybody here has got similar stories to share. And Telefonica's research is saying that there is 6.7 billion of digital knowledge lying amongst those 1 million unemployed young people. And surveying across them, 9 out of 10 of them can use social media to promote events, 2/3 can design a web page, 1 in 5 can build an app, and 1/4 have experience in coding languages, yeah? But there are so few employers who need that sort of capability. And I'm talking about startups and businesses in every sector of the economy. I mean, startup businesses are now online by default. These are the skills, very capability they need, and offering young people that sort of opportunity and getting that information out, not just to the young people, but I also think we need to get the information about the capability that's in young people out to many employers as well.
Well, but tell us, you're doing that. eSkills UK is telling those stories to young people, is it not?
Yes, we certainly are. And I agree as well in terms of young people don't understand the technical jobs that are available. Yeah. And we have an absolute travesty. I know the panel feels very strongly about this around gender. And you used your statistic in Canada of 25%. In the UK, the workforce is 17% female. We are not going to fix our skills problem if we're fishing in half of the talent pool. And so in the UK, we've decided you just can't wait for it to fix itself. So we're taking targeted, strategic action, starting at a very young age. It's at about 9, 10, 11, girls start saying, it's not for me. My favourite comment was from a 12-year-old girl. She was asked a very simple question: would you consider a career in technology? Her answer was, no. Have you seen the state of the boys in the computer room? It's a really interesting connection being made in her mind. So we're running programs at primary school and secondary school where employers are actively supporting young women into careers, because what they're saying is we cannot. The CIO of the Royal Mail is currently recruiting 300 new staff into the Royal Mail in the UK. She said to me, the recruitment agency has been able to put forward one female candidate. So the programs we're running is offering mentoring, work shadowing, work placements to get young women and support them into the sector quickly.
Yeah, so go ahead, John.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point of the mentoring is so critical. And I think we have to move beyond telling kids what career is like, because they hear us and the words we speak often mean something different to them than they do to us. I think we have to show them. We have to bring them into the game, so to speak. And I think if you actually go into the kind of, let me just call it the hackathons that the employees run at places like Facebook and Google, you would understand that programming is a team sport. It is an adventure. It is team. Amazing things happen, incredibly short periods of time. Action happens, and you touch the world. That is not the view I have of IT even 10 years ago. So I think that in fact, if we actually could communicate, let them experience what this new world is like, you would have quite a different response. However, I think we have to realize that corporations themselves have to change, because a lot of the IT shops I know in the big boxes, basically are run very much like they were 5 and 10 years ago. And so I think that if we go back to our missing partner, Alan McAfee, the race against the machine, the real question is, how do we race with the machine? What are the kinds of skills that are required to say, no, it's not us versus the machine, it's how do we together jointly, as you do in surgery with Da Vinci, et cetera, how do you do something that was impossible to do before, and what's the right type of synergy? And that synergy is constantly evolving.
Okay, I just want to jump in, if I may, and speak from my perspective, because as Don mentioned, I'm involved with an organization called the Canadian Coalition for Tomorrow's ICT Skills, and share some of the things that we've been doing, which, by the way, to address this, I think we're sort of having a little discussion here about what's the focus. Is it mentoring and practical everyday experiences, or do you go into classrooms and tell people what these careers are all about? And quite frankly, I think you need to do both, because you can only mentor so many people. It's really hard to mentor large numbers of people. And what we really need to do is change the culture. This is fundamentally, this is a culture issue. And the culture, what we found at our organization, based on research that we've done, is that people think of ICT-related careers, and it's not just kids, it's their parents, it's their teachers, it's their guidance counselors. We've got these paid agents of the state going into classrooms, namely teachers, telling them that, this is a geeky field, you spend all your time doing this boring programming stuff. If you have any creative potential, you probably want to become a writer or something, maybe a doctor or a lawyer. And oh, by the way, if you're not careful, your job's going to get offshore to some other country. That's the perception of this field. It's two levels, it's 2 orders of magnitude behind what we're talking about today.
Precisely.
So we need to change the narrative about this. And in fact, the Digital Jobs of Tomorrow project that Dr. Leach referenced is our project. And it's been done not only with the support of the Government of Canada, HRSDC in particular, but also by 25 of our employer members who are not just supporting it financially, but also with a lot of practical activity, sending their employees into classrooms, conveying this new narrative. And the tagline of this narrative is today's careers, as I said before, mash up tech with anything you imagine. And it's just a completely different way of describing what this field is all about. It's very user-friendly, social media. And the way we handle the gender issue is we put lots of girls in front of the students, and we put lots of girls onto the Career MASH website that tell these stories. So you know, there are things we can do, and people are starting to address these things. But it's quite honestly, this little project has only been in Southern Ontario so far, and you know, we're kind of trying to move it nationally. But you know, if we can find ways to extend these projects, then we can really, but we need to see it as a cultural transformation issue. I mean, 5 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, about 30 or 40% of the doctors and lawyers in Canada were female. And over 50% of the graduating classes in law and medicine were female. Nobody went out and campaigned among girls to say, hey, you should go into law and medicine. They decided to do it, and you know, we didn't have to do mentoring or any of that stuff. There was this culture that said these are attractive careers, and they bought into it. And you know, inevitably now, women are going to be the dominant numbers of people in those fields. So I do think, you know, we need to really have a bit of both. Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, you know, at Intel we have a big issue with the whole gender gap. And, you know, what we've seen is that many times it starts, you know, it needs to start at the school level and early childhood education, very young. And part of the problem actually is the computer labs. Kim Stevens talked about a program we did in Portugal. And that program brought computers into the classroom and that they could use at home. So there wasn't a room where you go learn about the computer. The computer came to you, and the content really was what mattered. And what we found in Portugal, I was the country manager at the time, living in Madrid, that the power user in Portugal in 2006, computer power user, was probably a boy about 18 or 19 that knew how to play games and get online. Today in Portugal, if you take a survey and speak to Dr. Mario Franco, who was quoted yesterday, it's probably a girl about 11 years old, because they've had technology in the classroom since they were in first grade, and they're using the technology for content that matters to them. And because of that, they'll go out and they'll customize it and program it and modify it, not in the classroom, but probably at home or wherever else they want to be. So that mobility breaks away and gives it more of a personal touch that ultimately gets us to have the female participation that we desperately need.
So is it Estonia that's now teaching coding in elementary school? Do you aware of this? Should we be doing that? Should coding be part of, sort of instead of the 3 Rs, or as an extension of the 3 Rs? Any thoughts?
Well, I think we need to teach coding, yes, but make history more engaging by using technology. Yeah. Make writing more applicable. So I think the application of technology is as important as learning how to code. But I think there's a combination of both, because we don't need necessarily more consumers, we need more creators. So I think you need both.
And a twist on this may actually be to look at, for example, visualization. I mean, with technology today, so much of the game is now not just big data, but how do you actually visualize what you can find in that big data? Well, visualization is as much artistic, humanistic as anything else. And that becomes, I think, an interesting transition object from the usual view of coding to here's a mystery. What are the weak signals in here? Please help me find it and tell me what to do with it.
Okay, I'm going to proxy for Andrew McAfee, who's our phantom 5th or 6th panelist here, because it happens to be corresponding to some of the questions that came up on Twitter that Don brought me. And basically, Andrew's perspective in Race Against Machine is that we are automating away a lot of middle-level jobs. You know, when you go into the airport, you don't deal with any professional staff anymore. You work with a machine. You know, a lot of jobs are being automated. You know, if they're not being automated, say in law or even medicine, they're moving offshore. And we're kind of eliminating a lot of these middle-level, middle-class jobs. And that's one of the reasons why we have a crisis of the middle class. It's not just because of pure economics. So I have a couple of questions here. What do you say to youth concerned that ICT jobs will be offshored? Won't the cloud reduce the number of ICT staff that we need? So more generally, are we overstating the problem? Is there actually going to be, is the bottom going to fall out of the ICT professional field? What do you guys think? Yeah. And if not, why not?
Well, you're asking actually 2 or 3 questions in one.
Yeah,
I
David,
mean, what we do with IT jobs is shifting a great deal. Back to the whole notion of how do you deal with big data? How do you actually make sense out of this? How do you start to visualize this? How do you move it much more into business thinking? And I'm really struck that as we think about software as a service, well, by the way, it's going to be business as a service. That doesn't mean they're not going to be jobs business people. I think the catch is to recognize that now what we're doing is if you figure out how to race with the machine, and Andy's book at the end kind of gets at that, but it just touches the surface. If we need to be able to find a way that the machine does more and more of the predictable stuff, anybody who actually runs an IT shop, especially in ERP, knows any business process that you execute always has exception conditions. It is us that fix those exception conditions, ain't a machine. And that creates tremendous opportunity to kind of learn some more, ... But the real catch, I think, is how do we actually shift organizational architectures, not IT architectures, that actually uncouple more of the creativity of folks? Because, in fact, if you put everybody in silos with very strict notions of what the work process actually is, then those jobs go faster by machine. And so I think what you're going to do is find a shift of how we use folks inside the firm.
Dr. Leach, you wanted to comment? No?
Well, I'm just commenting briefly. I completely agree that the definitions of what is an IT job is changing and rapidly changing. And I think we could go on to debate about, yes, we need people who can create technology, understand technology, but we also desperately need people who understand business, who understand customers. I mean, that is the global goal that we're all searching for. The only thing that I would say is, as IT is defined, yes, by standard occupational classifications in the UK and labour market information, employment has grown steadily over the last 12 to 14 years. And one of the things that makes me very nervous about attracting young people into the sector is I'm very worried that we're worrying the mums and dads that these jobs aren't around and aren't going to stay. And I think we've done that so many times in the past. And mums and dads have said, I don't think that career is going to be around in a while, so you better step out of it. And I think actually technology is going to underpin society and every single business. The sorts of jobs will change, but technical capability is going to be in such demand as we move forward, and we should be celebrating it and promoting that to our young people.
I completely agree. And to the point that was taken, ICT is one of those underpinnings. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, it's about having digital literacy. It's about making sure here in Canada, for us, that every Canadian has the capacity to interact in the economy, that will have a basis of ICT in every facet. So whether that be in my traditional profession as a surgeon or in the healthcare field, insurance, banking, everything. I think Canadian parents can be rest assured that their child, if they enter into an ICT field, is going to have a fabulous career. Now, that career may change as we move through various different changes of the economy, but they're going to have a great job because they have a basic skill, what's really becoming a basic skill, just like reading and math, and they will be able to participate in the economy in a very meaningful way.
Yeah, I think another factor here is entrepreneurship too. I mean, if you do say that, the skills and digital skills, advanced digital skills in particular, are a resource, a natural resource. Well, irrespective of your views on whether we should be burning it or not, we can never have too much oil, and we can never have too much brain power. And where a lot of that brain power is going today is into innovation. I'm associated with Ryerson University in Toronto, and it started in a little operation called the Digital Media Zone, which is basically an incubator for university students. It started off in a little corner of a room, and now it's expanded to 3 floors. And the university has just announced that their plan is to ensure that 10% of all their graduating students have an entrepreneurship experience as part of their education. So it's not just about jobs, getting jobs from employers. It's about creating your own jobs. And increasingly, because 10 years ago, when we had the dot-com crash, we had a lot of people selling rocks over the internet, and yeah, that didn't work. But we've kind of figured that out now, and we're fine. And it's a lot easier to start a business which actually is, makes sense today. And by the way, the DMZ has a tremendous series of success stories already under its belt. So, and we'll be hearing from the person who runs the DMZ tomorrow, who's chairing a panel. So, so my point is that when you think about this as a resource for the economy, and you think, okay, if you're gonna train for that in part of the way you educate people to some of those new kinds of skills that all of our panelists have been talking about, then it can generate its own jobs, its own opportunities. Not everybody, obviously, but probably more people than we might think.
I think we should be aware that although cloud may be how we transform from outsourced to upsourcing, that is taking out some of the classic jobs. It is exactly the cloud that lets you substitute OPEX for CAPEX or CAPEX for OPEX, actually. Right. So what it means is I don't have to raise almost any money to do a startup today. Yeah. And I have global reach from that. And so that dynamic has really changed.
And that's what those kids are all doing at Ryerson.
So I think approximately in San Francisco alone, we probably have like 1,000 startups happening. Yeah. And none of them have huge, venture capital funding at the moment.
1,000 that you know about.
Yes.
You were going to say something? Right? Yeah. No.
Yeah. I just want to comment. I think, and I think John's already said it, but at Intel, when you look at technology, we've evolved, and it was mentioned yesterday, from an ingredient to a platform to a solutions base. So the whole business side of it is really where the technology serves that. And to the extent where the technology will be relevant and your job will be relevant, as closer you are to the business. So these engineers really have to understand the business side as much as they have to understand the interdependencies of operating systems.
Okay, now I'm going to raise another question here, which was not specifically on our agenda, but it's of interest to me and it's pertinent to the topic. So excuse me if I haven't prepared you for this one, but how does university education change? We've got a revolution happening with online learning, experiential learning happening now. We need to teach people 21st century skills, as some people call them. The business model of universities itself is under attack with things like Coursera offering, hundreds of free courses over the internet. That's really been people have been doing this stuff for years, but this is now being perceived as a potential game changer in the economics of post-secondary education. That doesn't necessarily resolve the problem of how we educate people for these skills, but clearly we need to rethink how the university campus works. Does anyone have any thoughts on that one?
Since that's tomorrow's talk, but first of all, Coursera, et cetera, you think of that as content delivery, but it's not. It really is called flipped instruction. It is how do we transform the classroom where I get stuff thrown at me to go learn on your own, read the stuff ahead of time from Coursera, and then let's come in and solve problems together. And so it's kind of like flipping. Homework is done in class, and you're fed the material outside of class. And so, in fact, I think it becomes a much more creative use of the instructor, the professor, and so on and so forth. And that new material can get updated a hell of a lot faster than textbooks can do. I think it's really interesting that way. But I want to go back to the opening set of comments about we got to engage in learning on demand. And things like Coursera, Udacity, or OpenCourseWare in general is what most of us, after having graduated, how we refresh our skills. How do we engage in peer-based learning, study groups that we form maybe in the workplace around new material that you're pulling off the net? And so it's a sense of an arc of life learning we have to be thinking about, not just a course.
Karen.
I can just comment as well. I think I have to be very careful what I say here, but I think one of the big issues that we've got is that we tend to think that IT is graduate level jobs, And the way to arrive at a graduate level skill is to go to university. And one of the things that we've got is that universities are struggling, just as we all are, keeping up with the pace of change. So we have a big mismatch, so we certainly do in the UK, between the students graduating from university in computer science and what employers are all talking about what they need. And I just think looking at alternative recruitment pathways, and I was very interested talking to Dr. Leach earlier about the apprenticeship route, because we have an apprenticeship route in the UK, which is taking school leavers. It started off in other sectors. You know, it was more traditional in bricklaying and construction, you know, and in IT, everybody's thinking, well, you know, apprentices aren't for us. And then we started it off very much in sort of tech support and software development. But now employers are genuinely using it as an alternative recruitment pathway because they're finding hiring bright young students out of school and taking them to that graduate level capability while they're at work. They're finding the people are more productive, fee earning, more loyal, injecting youth and talent into a business. So I think we just have to start looking very differently at how we educate young people and what we value as a quality education.
Yeah, if I may, and I'd like to add that we have to start earlier. I mean, collaboration starts early in high school and before that, and problem solving, and not just learning to the test, but real problem solving. And I think that's fundamentally a shift that we have to make in our education system, especially in the secondary.
Here in Canada, we actually had a member of my caucus, he's now a senator, but was the president of Acadia University, who decided to create a transformational change for the economy by making sure that he had the first ICT-driven university campus in North America, which he achieved over 10 years ago, Senator Kelvin Ogilvie. And I have to say, what was learned from that experience is something that should be applied across the country, but also to help us deal with a substantive skills gap that we have and we don't focus on. To the point that was made earlier, we tend to think these are all graduate jobs. I can tell you about tens of thousands of Canadian jobs that are technology-based or from a college education that require ICT underpinnings. The radiology technologist in my operating room knows more about ICT than I do, and that's important for me and important for my patients. And so our government programs are actually focused on just that, not just the graduates in Canadian society, getting the master's and the PhD, which are essential, but also on all those individuals that want to enter into college. So whether it be apprenticeship grants or our career focus program or skills link program, making sure, as I said, that there's a digital literacy across the country so that every Canadian has an opportunity to participate in attaining one of those 72 or 74,000 jobs out there, and they have the basic underpinnings of an ICT education.
Hear, hear. I assume you're talking about Athabasca University, is that right?
Actually, Acadia.
Oh, Acadia,
Yep.
okay.
So based in the fine world of Wolfville, Nova Scotia, but Athabasca is another excellent example that has a great ICT base.
Yeah, and their entire program is online, but they also have residential aspects to all of their programs, so it's a blended approach. Well, I think this has been a terrific discussion. I'm not going to even dare to try to sum it up. For one thing, I only have 39 seconds left. So I'd like to thank each of our panelists for doing a terrific job, for putting your heart and soul into this discussion, and I think providing some insight and illumination for everyone in this room. Thanks again.
Thank you.